All right, I'm here with Stewart Mandel on the channel. Appreciate him taking the time to join me from The Athletic. Obviously, we've been following his work for a long time and talked to him in July, right after everything went down with Texas and Oklahoma leaving for the SEC. Now we have a season under our belt, one in which the Big 12 had 3 teams in the final AP top 10, 5 in the final AP top 20. And I'm talking there about the new look Big 12, Stewart. So I appreciate the time in joining me here. What is the significance of what the new look Big 12 was able to do this year, actually out there on the field by getting a team in the playoff and having 2 others that were pretty close around the fringe?
You couldn't ask for much more in terms of establishing credibility for the new Big 12, and to go from that period of uncertainty in July and August when people wondered, is the league even going to survive, to obviously stabilizing their membership and then on the field. And I'm not saying one season changes everybody's perception necessarily, but if you were to ask for the ideal outcome, it was for 2, after Oklahoma won it 6 straight years, for somebody else, and frankly 2 other schools, to make the conference title game. And then obviously Cincinnati really bolstering its credibility as a program by breaking through and reaching the playoff. I don't think the league could ask for much more than that.
Totally agreed. And the other part about it, I think that really stuck with a lot of Big 12 fans was worrying about the TV numbers, because there was a lot made about that when the irate 8, that group left over. Obviously your piece brought a lot of light to that. Sam Bradshaw from Sick'em 365 maybe disputed some of that with some context, but either way, it did not look very good. But now we have a Big 12 championship game with 8 million viewers with Baylor and Oklahoma State because of, I would think, predominantly the stakes that were attached to that with how they had played. Is there something to that? Like how positive of a thing is that for the Big 12 to show that, hey, some people will actually watch teams, not Texas and Oklahoma?
It certainly helps. I mean, I don't know that, one season drastically changes the way networks view programs. And if you look at this past season, if you look at any list of the top 10 or top 20 most watched games, almost all of them are Big 10 and SEC and Notre Dame. And that's nothing new. It's just amazing how resilient those brands are from year to year, even if they're not. I mean, Penn State wasn't very good in the end of the day this year, and they are like in 3 of the top 10. And the Big 12, unfortunately, is losing the 2 schools that you could usually count on for those kind of numbers. So, but the thing about these TV deals is it's all about timing. And, back in 2010, the Pac12 really shocked a lot of people at what Larry Scott, the deal he was able to get at the time from a number standpoint. And it was really in large part because at that exact moment in time was Chip Kelly had Oregon rolling. They were must-see TV. Andrew Luck was at Stanford. So there is something to that. Ultimately, how the Big 12 does in TV, in the next TV deal, the single biggest thing will be interest. Are multiple networks interested? If it's just ESPN or if it's just Fox, then they can kind of name the price. They want multiple bidders, and certainly on-field success is only going to help with that.
I know thinking back a couple of months ago, there were some trying to say like, hey, maybe the Big 12 can get that total team payout up to $25-30 million a year, which seems much higher than what it was originally. And I would guess the answer is probably somewhere in between, those 2 ranges that we're kind of talking about there. But what is your expectation for what could be reasonable for that TV deal when it comes around? Best case scenario.
I saw that some quotes from Big 12 administrators saying they thought they could keep it the same. I think that's probably being too optimistic. I also heard from people in the TV industry who said, oh, it's not going to, they'll be fortunate to make much more than the AAC does now. I think that's being too pessimistic. It's somewhere in between. And like I said, there's too many variables to put a number on it. But I think the single biggest data point that you can use as a barometer is when Bob Bowlesby came out and said that Oklahoma and Texas drive 50% of the revenue. So you just look at the number, and I don't remember what it is exactly off the top of my head, 28 million, something like that, 30 million, and they're half of that. And then you go from there. So I don't think it's realistic that they're going to make the same amount of money that they do now, but I also don't think it's going to be disastrous, it's some sort of disastrous downfall.
I think one of the things that really stuck with at least my audience, a lot of Big 12 fans, it seemed like people here was, when comparing the Big 12 and the viability of the league moving forward, it's easy to, obviously it's not going to be the SEC or the Big 10. too far ahead for a myriad of reasons. But when you compare it to the Pac-12 or the ACC, I think especially with the year the ACC had this year, that's where a lot of the frustration was, like, why can't the Big 12 be as competitive as these two leagues? How do you evaluate the next 5 to 10 years of the three leagues, like the situations that they're in and where the Big 12 stacks up there?
As of this moment on the field, the Big 12 is better than either of those two conferences. And that has been the case, I would argue, for several years. Now, just losing OU, one of the most successful programs in the country, obviously that impacts that. But, like I said, I mean, we talk Power Five. If we're being honest, it's the Power Two in terms of both on the field and money that they're bringing in. Those other three, and some Big 12 fans were really upset at me in the summer, upset at me and my colleagues. They thought we were, like dancing on their grave. It wasn't that. What happened to the Big 12 could easily happen to one of those other. If USC left the Pac-12, the other Pac-12 schools would be like the irate eight. If Clemson left the ACC, same. There's a lot of schools in there that don't carry their own weight from a financial or competitive standpoint. So this isn't unique to the Big 12. They just had the misfortune of being the ones that lost these members.
We talked a little bit about the Big 12's upcoming TV deal. What about for the Pac-12? I know you're pretty connected out there. They're closer, obviously, to a new TV deal happening, closer to those negotiations. Big deal to get Lincoln Riley in there, but what are the odds of the Pac-12 being able to stay close to where they're at, or potentially get more from a new TV deal?
I think they'll get more. I mean, it's the same membership. And remember, that deal was done 12 years ago. So the value of sports TV rights overall have gone up exponentially since then. But I think a lot of Pac-12 administrators have been holding on to a somewhat naive notion that they're going to substantially close the gap on the Big Ten and the SEC. And again, networks increasingly are the importance of big live events is more important than ever to their portfolio. But when we talk about that, we're talking about Ohio State, Michigan, Oklahoma, Texas, which unfortunately won't be a Big 12 game anymore, Alabama, Auburn, the Big 10 championship game, the SEC championship game. These are big, massive TV events. Run of the mill Pac-12 games are not, and especially with the time zone issue. So I think they'll do better. I'm very curious what their strategy will be. I think they will have to decide what's more important for the Pac-12, money or exposure, because they will frankly get more interest if they're willing to put more games at 10:30 at night, because there's no other option. Or, with streaming services, if they were willing to put a bulk of their good games on ESPN Plus or Paramount Plus or something, I think they would actually get more money for that. But then you would risk losing a lot of exposure, losing a lot of eyeballs for some of your marquee games.